All right. Happy Saturday, Scott Baker.
Indeed, Mikey. And I would say that today's lead better, today's field note that we're discussing, one of the more unusual ones that we've done probably since we've had field notes, because I don't think we've ever had a title quite like this. The title for field note 1633 is Do You Watch Too Many Revenge Films?
Right.
Now, I know you like to go to movies. In fact, usually on your birthday, you go to like movies all day long. You'll do 4, 5, 6 of them. So do you watch too many revenge films?
I don't watch too many, I don't think, but it brings up an interesting question: is what classifies as a revenge film or not? So I don't want to get
correct, yeah, right.
I don't want to get too nerdy, but do you think Star Wars is a revenge film?
Well, I think that's actually the central question that we should discuss, because obviously
right.
The field note is saying that leaders who are seen as sort of vengeful, right? Somebody that is out for punishment and retribution, that this is a net negative to their leadership.
Right.
And that if you are obsessed with watching movies about revenge, perhaps that this would actually amplify these tendencies in your personality. Yeah. And obviously what you're pointing out is the question is, in the canon of all of film or all of literature or all of narrative,
yes,
what are the elements of revenge that consume and destroy you? Because there's many of those stories. And then there's many stories that are about justice and courage and standing for the thing that's right.
Yes.
And those tend to be very popular movies for very different reasons.
Right. But we pick on John Wick at the very end, saying that's a version of a revenge film that we're watching for a specific reason. But when you just described what is not a revenge film by describing it as a person who is actively seeking justice and, their sense of courage and the way that they navigate through the hero's journey feels and looks different than John Wick. But when you analyze what John Wick went through in order to get to the point, it's not too much of a different story than what Luke Skywalker went through, right? So he's kind of pulled out.
Did they kill Luke Skywalker's dog?
They killed his family. So,
yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. But you get the point here.
I understand the humor that you're trying to make, but when you think about a character who is a reluctant hero, which is part of the hero's journey, and John Wick did not want to go back into that lifestyle.
Exactly, right.
John Wick is on the second version of cycling through his hero's journey because he has established for himself a shire, a peaceful place for him to live. And when John Wick is pulled back into this otherworldly place that he doesn't want to be in, he has a reluctance to go to it, right? You can see the same beats. Here, I've got it for us to look at, right? Okay. So we've got an ordinary world and then a call to adventure. And then step 3, which is oftentimes not really quoted that much, is there is a refusal for the call, right?
Or at least a hesitance, as you indicated in John Wick saying, no, I'm not going to do this. There's a deep reluctance.
Yes, right. And so we like to think about the fact that all it took was his dog to die, right? But there was several emotional moments that kind of led into it. For Luke Skywalker, like you might be able to say, oh no, he was this eager young kid who wanted to get involved with the resistance to the Empire, but he didn't really know what to do. He wanted to get off world, and so he's not quite the same character, right? But whether or not they're both characters who are seeking revenge can kind of be made out to be like, well, I think that you can kind of see all heroes' journeys have a motivation that could be thought of as revenge.
Right.
Now, it's dressed up as a noble thing, right? In the same way that Luke Skywalker's revenge motive is actually dressed up as justice. And
okay, well, pause this graphic right there, because I want to pose a couple of questions, and we'll come back to the graphic. So there's an element here of what's the difference between revenge and what's the difference between courage and justice.
Yes.
I've had moments in my career where I've had to make decisions, and I think that if we were looking at this and saying, well, we can all picture the person who's the leader who is the bully, right? Or they are the backstabber. Whether they're doing that by outright aggression or by gossip. This could cross all levels of age and gender and background. We all know the malevolent side of all of those characteristics.
Right.
And as I said, there's lots of stories, Shakespearean stories about people consumed, with these kind of things. And usually the story ends in their destruction, right?
Yes.
Now, you can imagine somebody who's very angry that somebody else got sort of promoted or elevated or got away with something. And so whether you're, again, the high school bully or you're one of the mean girls or whatever it is, you're out to kind of like you're all of the negative characteristics of your persona are brought to bear to do injury to that person. Now, I have seen that happen in the business world. It's a little bit less common, right? And I think, in fact, I would say that in many cases, the bigger problem is a lack of principles or courage or the ability to stand for something that would be just, not necessarily belligerently, but to work toward that in a very firm way. And in fact, I've heard it posited, and I've kind of always felt that this was a good definition, that any project, any work endeavor, any mission for an organization or a startup is a conspiracy against something that is very wrong in the world. Right? That you're trying to set right something that is not right. And so in that sense, the very act of creating business, is that revenge or is that making things better?
Yeah, right. So it's a difficult thing to understand where we cross over. So in the hero's journey, there's oftentimes this notion of there's three acts, right?
Yes. Now you could go back if you want to go to continue taking us through the the piece here. But three act. Wait, there's two in this picture for those who aren't watching.
Right. No, the three acts aren't kind of mentioned.
I know. I understand.
We're crossing from an ordinary world into an extraordinary one. And when we cross that threshold, you can see it in a lot of different ways. For Harry Potter, it's like when he finally goes through the gate and he's now in the magical world. For Luke Skywalker, it's like getting to outer space for him is crossing into that threshold. For John Wick, to kind of understand where these things are parallel, it's introducing the audience to this world of like where hitmen. So you don't exactly cross into this special world until the second John Wick movie, where you realize, oh, there's this hotel where there's rules, right?
Right, yeah.
So, but there's this second act that you have to make a choice, right? There is an ordeal that you go through and it usually is associated with your training. For Luke Skywalker, it's the confrontation that he makes with himself in the cave in Dagobah, right? When Yoda is training Luke Skywalker, trying to get him to understand what it is to actually be a Jedi, right? So he's getting him to wrestle with his psychological demons. And
well,
so
we now see who's going to win the Star Wars category on Jeopardy. And you can send your emails with Star Wars questions to Mikey.
Right. But this psychological confrontation that you're having is probably the most important part of where you're in the in the hero's journey as to whether or not this is now going to be a revenge film or if you're going to try to find something that is for the benefit of the community and that you're bringing the elixir back to the community.
Yeah, right. So now then look then in the community could be your team within inside a large organization.
Yes.
And so sometimes the issue is if your team has been working on a certain project and all of a sudden they're going to assign it to a different division, the question there is not whether you're looking at your leader and saying, he finally kneecapped the leader of that other team by bad mouthing them in the conference, and then they got hauled in. It's that you would say okay, but more often than not, I think teams see leaders who, for their own political posturing or benefit, don't actually confront anything, and they don't stand up for the team.
And I think you're hitting on exactly what the difference between a revenge film and what we might think of as a coming of age film is.
Right.
So you could tell the story of it, the clown down in the gutter, and the little kids needing to go in down there and defeat the clown.
I'll take your word for it.
You could tell that as a revenge story if you make it highly personal.
Right. Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're trying to save the town. So there's always this motive of something bigger than me that is in there that makes it more of a community-built coming-of-age film that is good for the entire universe instead of just cathartic to your own power, right?
Yeah. Look, you could say, and I think that the thing that there is an instructive part, certainly in this field note, like all field notes, which is that we should have sort of a good sense of where our moral and ethical barometers are, where our own emotions are. And if you watch certain kinds of movies, it might put you in a certain kind of direction. And there's some research around the thing that's very claimed in the field note. I suppose you could watch tons of movies that kind of made you more that would tend to emphasize characteristics that we would think would be good, like empathy or agreeableness, but could be passivity or milk toastedness.
Right.
Yes. And so then you'd be like, you're less likely to kind of stand up for yourself or for others in places and where it's required.
Right.
And so that balance is the interesting part. It's like where the I wanted to get I've never had a vanity license plate, but I before the movie Sisu came out a couple of years ago, and the sequel just came out.
Right.
I went to go look and see if I could get that, because I have Finnish heritage. It's a Finnish word that means courage, determination. It's hard to actually fully translate it into English, in the face of sort of unstoppable odds, right? And my grandfather, embodied that in his service at Normandy, in the Battle of the Bulge, and at Market Garden, and in raiding the Eagle's Nest. And so I thought, well, that'd be a great way to honor his heritage and have it. Well, it was taken because I waited too long. It was available, and then the movie came out, and then I couldn't get it, right? So I was like, darn it.
Well,
now,
you just described the starting of a revenge story where you get your license plate.
Right, that's right. I tracked down the person who took my license plate. So I do think that the question is there certainly is a worthy point here, which is, if you're acting in business, in an organization, in any act of leadership where you are actually seeking revenge, punishment, retribution, then you're actually devouring your own soul, and your own team won't respect you. I think those instances are probably extraordinarily rare. And I think that more often it would be like, well, what are the things that we can do to bolster our sense of courage and virtue and justice, and how do we stand for those things?
Yeah, but because we're so used to watching movies, we're so quick. Like I don't think even Americans or modern people have the tendency to realize how good we are at deciphering movies, right? And therefore, when you choose to act as a revenge agent, where it feels like it's personal versus where you feel like you're trying to right the things that are in your office, people can see the difference immediately. And they know. And it's kind of amazing. And we listed in the field note, right? You're going to be viewed as less trustworthy. You're going to be viewed as more unfair. And you're going to be understood as highly unethical. If you take oftentimes what feels like the same behavior, but they understand your motive is selfish versus your motive is, for the group, for the good of the whole. And so apparently it's a lot easier for people to recognize in other people than we might even give ourselves credit for, because of the number of stories we've interpreted all growing up.
Right.
We know what it looks like to be a villain. We know what it looks like for a hero to turn into a villain. We know what it looks like for someone to have a selfish thing, and for something at the end of the movie to happen in such a way where I didn't realize it was the villain all along, right?
Right. Yes, that often happens. Yeah.
Right.
So look, I think what we know through all of this is that in the literature, in the social science, sure, there's an element to be like, if you get obsessed with revenge movies or horror movies or whatever, there's a positive side to all kinds of things. I don't know that if you watch too many comedy movies, does that make you a trivial person? I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think that that what we would say is that the stories that we tell ourselves and are the things that and not only the ones that we're watching and reading and incorporating, but the ones that then we're living into our own lives. That's actually the whole fabric of everything that is our lives, right?
Right.
So the question of how we live those things out is very important.
Yes.
And it's not like we'll do things right at every moment, but I know in my own experience, I can think of 3 or 4 occasions where I was in an organization, I was a big partner in a project, and one of the people involved, I caught them doing something that was unethical, illegal. And I knew that if I stood my ground on that it would probably break up the partnership and would probably, but it would not only cost me in terms of the business, the potential, the money and all of that, but it would take a stand against that behavior that would limit that person's ability to do more damage to other people in the future. Right? And we know in the literature that when you do stand for principles and justice and you set the right boundaries, going back to the, living in caves, that it actually leads to a greater stability and a greater peace and harmony over time. It's the people that give in to the aggressors, unjust aggressors, that actually create real turmoil and chaos and suffering for their own people. Right. And I left that organization. I went to another organization. And 5 years later, after great success, somebody was brought in by the owner who was, again, asked me to do something illegal. And I had to make a real decision about that. And, and my wife actually used an example from a movie. Like, I had the capacity to quit. Like, I didn't have like a lot at stake in terms of my future and all of that, but it would cost, I knew, this organization, if this person stayed in that role. And I think it probably did ultimately. I took a stand. She said, "Well, you're like Dumbledore in the Harry Potter book. I can't remember which number, where he sacrifices himself to save the ministry, right?" And so I turned that person in. I was a whistleblower in that regard. They ended up being frozen out of the organization. They were in a C-suite position, and later got pushed out of the organization. I knew I would probably have to leave the organization because this was going to create great turbulence for the owner and everything else. And that happened. And that was fine because I was prepared to do that, because I was like, I don't think it's right for this to continue. Now, I think that because of that person, and they moved on to just doing nothing that I could tell for the years after, it probably cost that organization hundreds of millions of dollars easily, right? And in the earlier case, as well. And so I don't feel bad at all. I wasn't seeking revenge, right? But I was taking a principled stand to do something in both of those cases that I was probably driven by the principles that maybe were in the stories or the movies that I had watched as a kid, including Star Wars.
Well, you can't anticipate that you're going to find yourself in that kind of a position necessarily, right? But it does bring up the idea of like, well, what is the behavioral part of this field note? Because it feels pretty much psychological all the way through. But I think with the way you said it is the right way. The behavioral part is tell yourself better stories.
Tell yourself a better story. Right.
Continue to tell yourself better stories. So
and you should look at the true movies of revenge, where you see a vengeful character and where they end up destroyed.
Yes, right, exactly. To increase your empathy a little more for that.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, good.
Thanks, Mikey.
Bye now.